So today, we'll be looking at how you can translate your research and academic expertise to careers outside of academia. So joining us for this very important conversation is Nathan Curry. Thank you so much, Nathan, who is a bio lead for low carbon fuels at the Transition Accelerator. He has a PhD in electrical engineering from right here at Concordia, actually, with a focus on renewable energy systems and waste to energy technologies. So, Nathan, maybe you can start by telling us a bit about what you do of Transition Accelerator and your role at the organization.
Okay. Just so that I know the context for the people attending, is everyone in the sort of volt age space, or is it from across different departments for grad students in general, or is it specifically on sort of decarbonization and energy?
So we have few students who are not part of Voltage, but majority of them are in Voltage, which means they're working in projects related to electrification. So in different disciplines, we have some engineers, different engineers, but we have a few students who are not part of the Voltage space.
Okay, that's useful context.
Mm.
Um, So yeah, I prepared a couple of slides. If you just want me to, I can give you a brief little tour through my career path so you can kind of have a context of how I got where I am now. I think that should be that will make things make a little bit more sense to
Yeah,
give context.
thank you.
So I finished my PhD at Concordia in electrical engineering, and I focused on waste to energy solutions and integration with renewable power systems. I did this in the PEER. It's the Power Electronics and Energy Research Group in the Faculty of Electrical Engineering. And so it was a little bit strange to focus on waste to energy when other people were focusing on, designing new electrical machines for wind turbines or working on sort of solar panel and battery system integration. And I actually, because Concordia allows a custom PhD, I did take advantage of that in that I also took urban planning classes at McGill. And I also did the first time a synthetic biology course was taught at Concordia, or I think it was the first time in Canada, a super interesting class where it's half taught by a biologist and half taught by a computer science professor. And because I was looking at anaerobic digestion and microorganisms and sort of biomass and biomass conversion systems, that was a really interesting way to get, more detailed information. And I was focused on integrating systems in the urban environment. And, I did a study for the roof of the Hall building, actually, the greenhouse up there. They still are in the winter time actually opening ventilation because it gets too hot in the sun. And I thought it would be interesting if we could actually use a heat pump and take some of that heat that needs to be exhausted and use it to heat an anaerobic digestion system that uses all the food waste from the downtown campus at Concordia to produce biogas, which can then be used to offset natural gas in the heating systems in the buildings in Concordia. And yeah, and so I also, did some urban planning classes to really kind of look at how cities work and how projects get done. Um, I then looked at getting jobs, professor positions in different places. But there was an opportunity to sort of continue my work at CWES. I don't know if it's even still there, the Concordia Institute for Water, Energy, and Sustainable Systems. Catherine, do you know if that's still around? Catherine
Yeah, I'm not
Motley.
familiar with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I ended up going. totally unexpected. I ended up spending a few months in the Canadian high Arctic, up in Nunavut, on an island in the Arctic Sea, and sorting through garbage, taking garbage from the landfill that was often burned, open burned, and the toxic smoke plumes were, you know, going into the community or settling on the land and then getting washed into the water systems where they do fishing and stuff. The community did. And we're looking at the potential to convert all of that waste into energy. And while I was up there in the high Arctic, I saw that there was a shipping container with a waste to energy system in the community that wasn't being used. And so I took down the company name. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard of them before. I should probably know about them. And so when I got back to Montreal, I looked them up. Turns out they were actually in Montreal, and it was a company started by two McGill ChemEng PhDs, and they had built sort of the world's smallest compact, gasification system, a waste to energy system where you produce hot water and clean emissions. And so I kind of just cold emailed and said, hey, I saw this in the north. I had a bunch of questions about it. Do you mind if I, came in and talked about it? Because I was working on the waste to energy potential in the Arctic. And so I had a meeting with this company in Montreal, and they ended up hiring me. So unexpected, was thinking about staying in academia. And the fact that I had been in the Arctic working with, indigenous community as well as part of the research, and I had a background in waste to energy, specifically integration with renewable power. These are things that I kind of just was working on without any real plan. And I ended up sort of falling into a company, a small company, less than 50 people, that was actually doing something that was exactly what I had been focusing on, and it was completely unplanned and kind of by chance, just following up on a random hunch. And but I was hired as a business development director, and so I didn't do an MBA. I had an engineering PhD, and it turns out the whole business development team were all PhD engineers because they tried hiring MBAs to do business development. And, 5 minutes into a conversation with a potential client, things get extremely technical really fast. And so not having the technical chops and having to go back to the engineers to do any sort of business development was just not working. And so the two people that were, sort of the CEO and the vice president were PhD engineers. They also made these electrochemical water treatment systems, and they had a ChemEng PhD running the business development for that and the project management. And I wasn't sure if it made sense to do that. It seemed like completely not what I had been training for, but I did do that job, and I was there for 8 years, and it was fantastic. It was a great opportunity to learn how things get done outside the theoretical. You can do your model of a system, but then when you actually, someone's going to pay $1 million to actually implement it or do it, things get very different very fast because you have all the permitting and the regulations and the compliance aspects and the international standards and the supply chain issues and who's going to make this steel part and what about these bolts? Can you get them from McMaster? Just like the nitty gritty of how these sort of waste to energy projects get done. And each project was kind of there's R&D involved because each project is not like the one before it. It could be in different parts of the world. Some of them are on ships that are in international waters, these small waste to energy systems. Some are in very remote locations in Australia, one was in Singapore, one in Hawaii. And so that was a great learning experience. And it kind of, I used the skills that I built through doing research and in the field, and um, kind of deep technical knowledge, but also having the ability to speak to people, to communicate well. I had gotten pretty good at grant writing, and that is also a fantastic skill. If you can translate a technical idea into the language that the decision makers want to see, um, also a very helpful skill that was able to get a bunch of government funding for different types of projects. So was doing that, and then COVID happens, and our biggest client was actually the cruise ship industry. And if you know what happened to cruise ships during COVID, they basically shut down. No one was going on cruises. Even some places, it was sort of legal mandates that you couldn't go on cruise ships. And also the U.S. military. This was Trump took office and kind of had these Buy American policies for American steel. And so a deal to, work with the Department of Defense on seeing if waste to energy made sense. Everything kind of evaporated. And during all of that, in, end of 2023, I got headhunted on LinkedIn. So I thought it was spam. Turns out sometimes those weird messages on LinkedIn are actually real headhunters looking for real positions. And I moved to the same type of position, a director of business development, which I had built skills in for 8 years, but in a completely different field, which is energy systems modeling, or they call it 3E, energy, environment, and economic modeling at a small consulting firm. And so I was doing business development, which is essentially just trying to get more consulting contracts for the services of this company. It wasn't a great fit. I definitely learned a lot and used the skills that I had built through my graduate and postdoc studies on just sort of learning fast, doing independent research, finding the shape of a problem so that you kind of know what the boundaries are, what you actually need to answer. And then to get my current position at the Transition Accelerator, which is a sort of not-for-profit energy transition organization that is kind of like a think tank, but we also try to get projects done in the real world and influence policy and kind of get decisions made that all point in the same direction. Keeping Canada economically competitive as the energy transition happens globally. And I had reached out to an old friend that I saw on an email list when I was unhappy at this position that I had taken through the headhunter, and just kind of a random email again saying, what is this organization? It looks interesting. And I ended up having a few conversations with them, and I got hired there, and it's a great fit. And I'm using basically, without all of the other steps, without doing like sort of a 10-month intensive course on energy systems modeling and techno-economics, I don't think I would have been able to be in the position that I am now, but also having the background in waste to energy, sort of on the ground experience with emerging technologies like gasification systems and electrochemical water treatment systems. Yeah, that's kind of the path that led me to where I am now, but it was not, I kind of, you can see I kind of put a zigzag through it. And I found that with a lot of people that have landed at my current job or in other jobs, a lot of times, things are kismet. It's a connection you made 10 years ago. It's, taking a chance, sending a cold email, asking a nerdy question with real interest at heart, something like that. So that's basically sort of a long-winded version to explain how I got to where I am, but I hope that was helpful a bit to give you context for where I'm at now.
It was Nathan. Thank you so much. As students, you can start typing your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom. But as you start typing that, I had a follow-up question to one of the things that you said. What was your biggest adjustment when you transitioned from academia to industry? Because you mentioned that was not necessarily the path that you were looking to go down. Um, so what was the biggest adjustment when you left academia?
Okay. Well, that was the next slide I prepared. So what I did like about it, what was hard to adjust to was really the speed at which projects or report generation happens versus academia when things can often, if you're preparing a dissertation or even like a publication, like I have one paper from my PhD that did really well. Like it's in the Renewable Energy Journal, but it was, I don't know, a 3-year process just for one paper. And the speed at which, you write a 20-page, like super detailed technical briefing and application because you see that in 3 weeks, this funding source that was on a random government website that no one had uh, pointed you to, it wasn't on your email list. You have, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to do something that's has $2 million at stake. Like that speed and that pressure was definitely different and took a little bit to adjust to, but I did enjoy that. I do enjoy that pressure. Some people don't. I find that having like a tighter deadline will actually, you can fit a lot. If you have a 2-year deadline in something, you fill that 2 years with work, no matter what it is. Maybe not all of it's super relevant, but if you have 2 weeks, you'll get to what matters pretty quick. And another example of that, um, talking to some folks, like I work on clean fuels now, and I was doing some stakeholder engagement. Industry in BC wanted to do a renewable diesel test. So it's a drop-in fuel. So it's basically chemically similar, if you don't know, to fossil diesel, but it's made from a biogenic source. So it's made from canola oil, wood residues, used cooking oil, etc. But you can run it in a diesel engine. What the claim is, it's so chemically similar, it's a little bit cleaner actually, and that you can run it in your existing diesel fleet. And so you can reduce your emissions 80%, use the same equipment, just change the fuel. And they wanted to run a trial, but in order to validate the emissions, profile, that they were actually reducing the emissions and particulates were going down, et cetera, they had to partner with a university because there was no sort of federal or provincial emissions testing equipment in place. And they said it was extremely challenging because the timeline between academia, like getting a student set up, getting the funding in place, like they wanted to be finished in 2 months with everything. And the academic schedule did not allow, like they're talking a year and a half before they would have everything available and publish a report. And so I think that's a really good example of just the speed change that happens. And then the thing that was also hard to adjust to, but I did enjoy, was learning how, you go from your sort of theoretical model where you're making all these assumptions to, okay, if we actually have to build this in the real world, where do we get that part from? Who has it? There's a 3-month back order in COVID. There's a year back, things are a year back order, and you have to figure out where you're going to get these materials from. Permitting can add, a year, 2 years, 3 years to a project. Regulatory hurdles that are in place, and maybe the regulations haven't kept up with the pace of innovation, and so you're having to try to get things going, convince people that what you're doing is not only safe, but you meet the existing regulatory, specifications, compliance with different international type regulatory bodies. Lobbying was also something that, I did a lot of driving to Ottawa and getting meetings with people in the government to try to get them to understand something or agree to something. And then the sort of immediacy of the results, I also find has been At first, it takes a little bit to get adjusted to because you finish a project much faster and you're on to the next thing, and there's feedback. If it's a real product in the real world, it's a little bit different than academia. So you have to manage that. And then this one's a little bit, tongue in cheek, but having weekends back was kind of an amazing thing that did take a little bit to adjust to just psychologically because I don't know, I did a master's and a PhD and a postdoc. So I was in the grad school or the academic environment for quite a while. And I almost feel guilty on a Saturday or a Sunday or going on a road trip where you're thinking, oh, I have so much, like I have to finish this thing. There was no sort of off setting in academia because the schedule is, a bit different. You have these longer term responsibilities that you have to meet, and it's your responsibility to fill in that time. So there is more flexibility there. But like the idea that you can leave work at Friday at 5 p.m. or even maybe at 7 p.m. if you're trying to finish something, and then, you know, disengage and then come back on Monday.
Thank you for that summary, because I think those are important considerations for students if they're thinking about whether they want to work in academia or industry. Like you're mentioning the time it takes or how much time you have to deliver results. You mentioned though, like it sounds like a lot of your roles still do have quite a big of a technical aspect. But you mentioned other skills as well. How to break down your ideas or how to break down your knowledge into non-technical language and having really good communication skills because you're selling, say for example, or you're dealing with somebody who may not necessarily be in your field. So first question, how were you able to develop those skills? And are there other soft skills, for example, that you feel, or non-technical skills that you feel made you really stand out across all your different roles?
That is a great question, and I do promise that we didn't plan this, but that's actually my next slide. Um, so yeah, it's a great question, and it is like to go back to the previous question about like adjusting. Um, this is one that I'm still learning, and I think it's going to be a lifelong learning experience, but you do get better at it with practice. So this thing you're talking about of translation is what I've called it here, but turning your technical depth or expertise into a so what. This is, I think, the single most important skill for a technical person or an engineer to develop because if you're building like this custom model for this problem you're trying to solve, you have your MATLAB code and you have your, Excel sheets and you have all of these results. Often the person that's going to make the decision maker, is not going to have the same technical background as you. And if you want them to do something or to help you get to a particular solution, you're going to have to convince them. And that's the so what. And so coming into the room, this is the next point, audience awareness. Oftentimes, I did have to learn this through experience, but when you're talking to a potential company that might buy your clean tech solution or your services, your professional services, if you're talking to the technical team, you can get really nerdy. And, I often had 3 different presentations depending on who I'd be talking to and trying to contextualize what they needed to hear. So like, how does this affect their bottom line? If they're in management or sort of the finance side of things, their so what is very different than the technical people because the technical people probably have a very specific problem that they're trying to meet, whether it's an emissions reduction thing, whether it's some compliance thing, or it's the water is too dirty to they're having problems with the process, there's a contamination somewhere, and you're trying to solve a very technical issue, and you need to show that you have the chops there, that you really understand the problem. But talking to someone else, it might be, is this going to save me money or how long will it take to pay this back? Is this going to affect, I don't know, 10 years ago, they would think, oh, how would this affect my ESG rating? Or, will this look good to my shareholders? Or can I use this for sort of marketing for some sort of thing that we're doing to reduce our emissions. Like those are completely different communication strategies. And if you go in with the wrong one, if you're talking about the technical details of, oh, this is how we are reducing emissions from this process, and that person is that's not the problem that they have, or it's not what they need to, it's like managing up. If whoever they're reporting back to, or if they're the decision maker, um, they need to say, okay, what was that meeting about? What are we doing with this thing? They have to know what to say. And so if you just think about that, what do you want them to say to the person that's making the decision? If it's not them, go with that. And I have found like one of the biggest skills though that does translate and keeps changing a bit is the ability to identify what the actual problem is. So sometimes there's a whole bunch of noise around a problem, and really through the grad school process, through the PhD research process, you do get pretty good at independent research um, in finding this shape and boundaries of a problem. And it is kind of related to the so what. It's if you're finding like where the bound of knowledge is, you identify the key question that will sort of motivate your research. And what am I actually trying to answer here? And yeah, that's kind of it. And the initiative thing. One of the things I've noticed is two of the jobs that I've had that I have enjoyed are from me sending a random message to someone. And it doesn't always work. And it is a skill as well to practice so that you don't seem, you know, overly desperate or cloying if you're trying to get a job. But like there are ways to talk to someone you haven't talked to in a while, or someone you haven't met before, in a way that's interesting and can get a response from them. Uh, yeah, the turning technical depth or whatever your expertise is into a so what, I think that is something that you should practice. And oftentimes I found it helps trying to explain things to your family. That's not so like, what do you actually do again? Or what are you working on? And trying to come up with a short way to explain what you're doing that is interesting to a person that's not in the field is actually, I don't know if other people have found that hard, but I have sometimes found it can be challenging. But it takes practice. With practice, you can kind of gauge what the person's interest or knowledge base is, and you can kind of get better at that 2 minute elevator pitch, because so much of random encounters or talking to people is getting that hook, in that 2 minute hook of here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm interested in, here's how I could potentially be helpful to you.
It's interesting you say that because we are developing a training program for the cohort members, and that's one focus that we have been trying to take, the science communications bit, translating the research into, let's say, language that can be understood by the more general audience. So it's very validating for you to say that you've seen in your own experience that this is a skill that's very useful.
Yeah,
Now,
and
mhm.
more so just to touch on that point just a little bit more, it also is an unsolved problem. Like you have like consulting firms have to do this a lot. Um, Generating really good graphics that look good, that don't just look like your Excel graph or your PowerPoint, getting good at like part of this so what is like taking a whole bunch of data and pulling out the right stuff. This has become somewhat easier with AI, but it still is about taste. And it is hard, like unless you're looking at a lot of reports that decision maker type people are reading and government people are reading, I don't know, like Ember does a great job at this. I don't know if anyone's read the electrification, the recent one. They just came up with this new kind of three-quadrant graph to show India and China, the like electrification, biomass energy, fossil energy graph, and how like they took so much complicated information that is way too technically detailed and put it into a way that you have people posting it, people that are outside the field can get the point. And I feel like this is not it's almost a specialization and it's so rare. This is the problem I think I would have run into most as an engineer that tries to communicate with the public and with people outside of academia. Um, this is an unsolved problem, and it's also like I don't know, I find it's one of the hardest things to do. It really is challenging, and practicing now um, will only be beneficial. Like the better you get at this, the better your career will be outside academia because it's really this is what it's all about is changing people's minds, getting decisions made. And if you can't do the so what, it just makes things harder. The people that are able to change minds are the ones that have figured this out.
Very nice. Yeah. So this is something that we can continue thinking about. Maybe different formats of how the cohort can practice to translate their research.
Mhm.
Something else I wanted to touch on, you mentioned sending cold messages to different people and being able to ask questions to, people who you think would be able to address maybe the need that you have. Are there any tips that you would give on how to essentially start a conversation with somebody you don't know? And before you answer that, just a reminder to everyone in attendance, if you have any questions as they come up as we're talking, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom. Yeah. Sorry, Nathan, go.
I don't see that box. I just have meeting chat. Is
Oh,
there
you don't see it? Can
I don't
everybody else see it?
are there any questions
There's
in there
there's
already?
no questions at the moment, so
Okay.
just a reminder that everybody can yeah, I see you, Bara. But just a reminder, but in the Q&A box at the bottom. Um, yeah, but there's no questions that have come in yet. So maybe
Okay.
Nathan, you can give us your tips on how to um reach out to strangers.
Okay. Um, I did have the next slide was on some advice, and one of
Hmm.
the I mean, these are kind of generic, but they are relevant to what the question you just asked. And I think that um, practicing thinking hard about hard problems is a skill that is also becoming increasingly rare with AI. And I do want to highlight that there will be, limited returns if you just rely. I don't know. I didn't have AI in grad school. I can imagine it's been a crazy change over the last, like even in the last 6 months, things are a steps of like you can generate the craziest techno-economic model that would have taken 3 months, 4 months before you can do it in 3 minutes. But if you haven't built the muscle of thinking through, if you haven't spent the 3 months one time, like step by step going through something, you're gonna make like the mistakes will compound and it will just I don't know. There is value in continuing to practice thinking hard about hard problems. One thing that I've found to answer your question, like talking to people is like getting in the room is one of the biggest things. A lot of conversations in development of projects and potential connections happen at these conferences and networking events. And if you're a grad student, often you don't have a budget to go somewhere. But I gave two examples here. Like 2 years ago, I didn't go this past year, but 2 years ago, there was Carbon Removal Day in Ottawa that was dealing with carbon removals. I mean, that means 40 different things. There's people from the US, people from all over the world were there. It was free and high level government folks were in the room, CEOs of companies, 100 people were there. I had fantastic conversations. There were some grad students that were there. Um, I saw that as like advice on trying to make some of those cold connections is taking that risk and taking the train to Ottawa for a free conference for the day. There was even food there too, so you didn't even have to like spend money on food. Um, and the TSET at McGill, I've been to several talks there over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years that have had, big Vaclav Smil was there, like a big energy writer. and I went to a talk a couple of months ago and made a connection on biomass and energy from a professor from a research group, just randomly waiting around for an event to start, just saying, hey, what do you do? What are you working on right now? And just listening and saying, oh, that's actually super interesting. I have a project that's quite similar. Maybe we could collaborate on that. And there is this thing where sometimes, like I kind of, from working in academia and just seeing how detailed things are on certain, like sometimes you're 10 years ahead in academia working on things that just have no financial reason to happen in the private sector, but you're doing the research to make something happen and you're ahead of the field. But I'm finding more recently that in some of these clean tech spaces, especially like carbon removals or clean fuels, you have industry being way ahead of academia and even government, and going to these rooms in which these people are presenting and showing you, like a lot of times you're seeing slides at a conference on data or information on technologies that are just not in the public sphere yet. And it's not very hard to go to these things, especially if you're a student. You can They'll sometimes let you go for free, or you can do a poster or something. And so I don't know. The first company I worked at, the boss didn't like conferences. He thought it was a waste of time. But every time we went, I often found that that's where a lot of things happen. So I don't agree with some people's claim that going to conferences can be a waste of money or it's nothing happens. I have had a lot of fantastic connections that come from these conferences or networking events. And I'm just going to plug this concept of, theories of change, learning how power works, who makes decisions, how did the power system get built in Canada? Um, what were the things that happened sociopolitically for different advances over time? How have systems changed over time? And the Transition Accelerator, when it was founded in 2019, it's kind of built out of this. If we want to have an energy transition, we need a really good understanding of how the energy system has already changed. And so there's this document, Building Pathways to a Sustainable Future, about, how change happens, how we can actually have an energy system transition. And
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no,
Question.
no, go. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, work-life balance really matters. And I know when you're just starting your new job, you want to impress people and you want to work really hard. But more and more places I found are putting a lot of emphasis on your mental health, your work-life balance, to make sure that you don't, because if you, like, there's no advantage to burning through, five graduate students that just graduated in a row because you have no continuity. It takes so much effort to build the capacity and the skills that are needed at a specific company. And so they don't want you to burn out and not be able to work there anymore either a lot of times. And so I do think, like, having a life, I know it's kind of a silly thing to say, but it's real. And you should always, do a sort of status check on yourself every few months to see how you're doing, especially when you're starting out, because you really want to pour yourself into it and get really good at what you're doing. The first 3 months, you feel like a child at any new job. Even at, having a PhD, postdoc, 8 years of experience, doesn't matter. You're going to feel like a child and that you don't know what's happening for at least the first 3 months, and that's normal. So it takes, at least 3 months to feel semi-comfortable in any new job. That's probably like I don't know if that's common knowledge, but that is something that someone told me at my first job when I was freaking out. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. This is so different. This is so new. They're like, no, it's don't even think about it for like you're not going to understand what's happening for at least 3 months. It's kind of freeing, you don't you still try your best and you learn everything you can, but no one's expecting you to have to understand everything in the first 3 months.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. We had a question coming through the Q&A box. You lightly touched on this at the beginning, but it was around how you reached out to the company that ended up hiring you and how the conversations shifted to you working with them.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think genuinely it was the fact that I was genuinely passionate about waste to energy because I spent so much time learning about it. And I really wanted to figure out, can we do waste to energy in the Arctic in Canada? Because seeing the impacts of like, it's still happening. Most northern communities are open burning their waste. And it's having effects. In Alaska, there was a study on like birth defects in a lot of these remote communities because of open burning of garbage, because it settles on the land as the permafrost is thawing, it's getting into the water systems and the food supply, et cetera. And so being being nerdy or passionate about something and being able to communicate your interest in a subject, I think maybe that was the key in that I was able to explain the human aspect of why I cared about this. Like if you're a company that's dedicated your life essentially, like you started a company, you're building these systems, if you want someone to work with you to get other people to care about this, you want someone that's passionate about it. And so I think that's another reason why like the MBA that they tried to hire like business majors to do this, they just had no context. Like it's just so much learning to understand what all of the technical and environmental and like social issues are around something. And yeah, I guess that's how to answer that is that it was being, I thought it was so cool. These people built I didn't like through all the research I did, it was relatively new. It was in the last couple of years, but I just hadn't found it yet. Maybe I'd seen something at a conference. I didn't think it was real yet, but they had a real product and it was new and it was commercial and it did something that I thought was really cool and I had spent a lot of time learning about.
Perfect, thank you. Um, Follow-up question on that. Y- I know it can be very easy when you're starting to um, even necessary, not only easy, but maybe necessary to have blinders on because you're delving very, very deeply into a topic. How do you, while you're getting that in-depth knowledge of a very niche or a very specific topic, how do you still, at the same time, develop the kind of the socioeconomic perspective that you would need. So, like you're talking about how you were able to demonstrate your interest in some of these topics a bit more broadly. How can you develop those perspectives while still focusing very deeply on your topic? I don't know if that
So that is a good question. Me personally, maybe this is just why I had the career path that I had is that I'm someone that I was like in grad school playing in bands, going to art shows, none of my close friend group were engineers. And so I was constantly like in my social interactions, just learning how artists or musicians are processing what's happening in society. Actually reading the news and finding out, what like a lot of things are happening in Canada through government programs. And oftentimes when you're like on a grant that you got through your research group, you're only focused on that one thing. But oftentimes the people in government had set up a four-part research track that has these different end goals in mind, and there's specific sectors that Canada is trying to build out. And I think it does take practice, and maybe this is something that would have been helpful in grad school is to have the context of like why are we doing this I don't know geomembrane study right now at Concordia is like part of a broader theme of what's happening in the government. And I don't know, there's been a lot of trends. Like when I was in when I started in grad school, we weren't allowed to say the words climate change in our grant proposals for talking about reducing emissions or solar panels or wind turbines or anaerobic digestion under the Harper administration. There were real scientific no like terminology that wasn't allowed to be used. And if you're just like sort of head down, like you have to think about that. Like what's happened? Like why am I not allowed to say talk about this? And then the Trudeau admin, there was a whole different, focus and things changed. And there was people had binders of projects from 10 years ago that they were able to maybe get funding for. And then now the language is around competitiveness, carbon competitiveness, energy competitiveness. There's like all these trade wars going on in the world. So if you're just head down or relying on your supervisor to change the wording for something, I guess it's just a general sort of awareness and reading more broadly. Um, but I do understand it's hard when you're like in the thick of it in grad school. But read a fiction book. I used to do that to go from the lab in the basement outside and sit at a picnic table and spend 30 minutes reading fiction just to kind of like shake my brain up a little bit. And, sometimes that actually helps you solve the problem that you were working on when your brain disengages from the problem, processes something else, and it's still working in the background.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? We have about maybe 8 minutes left in the session. Are there any questions? If not, I had a few more.
Okay.
So looking back with the career journey that you've had, is there anything that you wish you had done differently in your
Hmm.
PhD to better prepare you for working in industry? Or is there any training or professional development opportunities that you would have taken, knowing what you know now?
Yes, that's a great question. I think that when I said before about uh, sort of data summarizing or not just using like the auto-generated Excel graph, thinking about how graphs or like communication of technical information, I would have tried to focus more on that. And a lot of times you're going to be, you know, having to make a slide for your boss or trying to send an email, and you need one graph that just, or one like concept that doesn't exist, and understanding the steps, not only like, is that data available somewhere at my company or in my materials, but the steps of like, how hard would it be to get this information and make something presentable? So like all the skills involved in that. So there's some like, I definitely wish I would have taken Python courses because I know with Claude or ChatGPT now you can easily do to bypass understanding it, but at least having the basics of like how Python works and how to have it set up on your computer so you can go fast and do something fast, generate a graph, and validate it. Because a lot of times the AI generated graphs are garbage and you can't, they're like missing the point. Um, and the other thing, it kind of happened just like writing for a non-technical audience. Writing different things. I did a lot of grant applications or like trying to write papers for conferences and stuff. And there's a specific cadence or like certain way of like being hyper specific and hyper detailed in what you're writing that really is a different skill than writing for a non-technical audience. And that if I had practiced that earlier, I think that would have been beneficial to my career. And I would have been able to, not have spent, late night sessions just like trying to read things and figure out how to write things better.
Thank you for that. We have one more question from the audience. Maybe this will be our last question, depending. Um, do you consider going back to academia or doing both, working both in industry, or academia? And follow up to that, how much flexibility do you have to be able to do so if you decided to go back into academia?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. I I potentially would like to do that because you can work on big problems for a long time if you can get the funding for it, on the same problem for a long time. And potentially interested. I know that there was like at Concordia when I was finishing my postdoc, there was a waste to energy position, a professorship that opened up. And I asked my supervisor, I'm like, oh, is this for me? Like, this is interesting. And she was like, no, you can't do your PhD and postdoc somewhere and then get hired there. Like, you have to go. She's like, go to industry for 10 years and then come back and you can get a fantastic position. And I don't know how true that still is. Like, I'm publishing things like here, I have this like report that I worked on with three or four other folks, including some PhD academics in Alberta and a retired professor. There's a main report that is kind of the so what, and then there's two. How we solved this problem was that we did we wrote a two technical reports, like two technical I guess we call them briefs. They're both quite long, but it wasn't getting to the point because I was working with academics and this group, Northex, they fund hard tech climate stuff. And to make their investment decisions, they need the so what. We have all this potential, or here's all these technical details. Okay, so what? Where am I going to put this $10 million? That is a very good lens by which to figure out if what you're like, is there a so what there? If you've done all this technical analysis, would it make sense to invest in something, or which solutions need more R&D, or should they invest in R&D on this, or is this commercially ready, et cetera, et cetera. But this report is out. There's the main report, and then it's all downloadable on the website, and you can look at the two technical appendices as well to kind of get a sense of like, it's basically, I would say, between a master's and a PhD report, and it happened in less than a year. And I would say it's high quality. And so this is something that, I'm still working with academics sometimes, adjacent to academia, but yeah, I would be open to going back for the right position, or the right topic. But I honestly still feel like I need a few more projects under my belt before I would think about guiding other people, because things are changing so fast and there's so many new technologies that just from what I'm seeing are about to come out, like things that are very close to getting their final investment decision on new technologies that are sort of pre-commercial but maybe commercial, that will change a lot of the landscape in Canada on the way that we deal with emissions and energy, the carbon removal space, the clean fuel space. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening, and I do like that I get to be close to it in my current role, and I can reach out to these project developers and ask questions. Yeah, kind of a
Thank you.
rant, but I'm not sure if that answered the question, but that's
It did. It did,
okay.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. That's all the time that we had for today. But thank you again, Nathan, for joining us and everybody who was able to attend the session. Are there ways for the students to connect with you after this in case they have any pending questions?
Yeah, they could send me on LinkedIn. They can send me a
Okay.
message.
And that's just on Nathan Curry.
Yes,
Perfect.
I'm in Montreal. Here, I'm still in Montreal.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again, and we'll catch up soon.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.